Hi, and welcome to the second installment of readings from Gift of the Shaper. In case you missed the first one, I've got the link below. If you hit more info for the stream information, it's linked there. I suggest starting at the beginning, where all good stories usually start. But if this is your second time joining me, if you already kind of know what the stream is about, then welcome back. Good to have you. This is basically going to be readings from my book, Gift of the Shaper. And the stream idea is basically for me to kind of give like commentary along the way, sort of, insights into how I wrote the book, some of my inspirations, how I developed the characters, etc. So, with that being said, we'll go ahead and get into chapter two, which takes place in Lusk, one of the nearby towns, and this one is told from Thornton's POV. It was a half day's ride west from the village of Highglade into the town of Lusk, and most of it was spent quietly. The soft, steady thumping of the horses' hooves on the dirt road provided a backdrop for the silence. Jericho, the taller of the two horses, even tempered and strong, was in front. He made a good leader since he was familiar enough with the route that Thornton barely had to tell him where to go. The horse's bold brown coat had started to fade with age, but his demeanor remained unchanged. He led the way comfortably, with Mira and Matilda bringing up the rear. The idea for naming horses, which was actually a comment that people made, they were like, "Oh, I'm so glad you named the horses." So I got that from Robert Jordan and his Wheel of Time series, which was actually a really big inspiration for this book, as far as some of the story qualities go. And Robert Jordan loves to name horses. I don't know why, but I thought it was a pretty good idea, and it kind of gives them more of a quality of like they're actually a character in the story, and I treat them as such. So that's kind of why that was my reasoning behind giving the horses names. So Thornton had made this trip many times before. When he was a boy, he used to ride in the back of the cart as his father walked beside them. He would watch in awe as Olson unloaded the cart himself, and then watch as the customer struggled to lift what had been delivered. After that came the ride back home, with most of it spent talking. Olson was a man of few words, yet, as good as he was at carrying heavy things, Thornton was even better at carrying conversation. Some trips, Thornton spent the whole time talking. He loved every minute of it. It was always just him and his father. Then, a few years ago, Mira and her father had come to Highglade, choosing to settle in a home not far from Thornton's. He could still remember the first time he saw her. She was this energetic little thing with bright blue eyes and an ever present smile. The other girls in the village seemed to be jealous of her, but Mira never minded. She always carried herself with an air of confidence, even at such a young age. The women of the village were always grabbing her cheeks and telling her how precious she was. She was always pleasant and well mannered, offering up a polite "thank you," accompanied by a curtsy. The village women ate it up, and it wasn't long until they all knew her by name. Before he passed away, Mira's father had been a peddler who sold his wares in town, leaving Mira by herself in the village to do as she pleased. Sometimes she would watch the boys as they roughhoused, rolling around in the dirt, climbing trees, and making up games. She was she was never asked to join, but more often than not, it looked like she would barely hold herself back. The girls, however, mostly jealous of the attention Mira got from the mothers, never asked her to play. They would all sit cross-legged in a circle, making sure to leave her out, laughing a little too loudly and smiling a little too broadly. That all went on for a few weeks until, on a dare from the boys, and more out of sympathy than adventurousness, a mud-covered Thornton raced over to her and rubbed his hands all over her face. The laughter from the girls' circle suddenly went quiet, and there were even a few gasps of surprise from the boys. Mira stood there looking at Thornton, who was standing so still it looked like he'd forgotten to breathe. Then, calmly and deliberately, Mira walked a few feet over to the nearest mud pile, scooped up some mud in her hands, and threw it right in Thornton's face. Laughter erupted from all around, boys and girls alike, as the biggest mud fight in High Glade history broke out right in front of them. Thornton wiped the mud from his eyes and looked at Mira, who was doubled over in laughter. He grinned, then threw a mud ball right back at her. It was a filthy start to a long friendship. The town of Lusk had recently become a trade of hub in Darinar, and was always busy during the daytime. People going in and out with trinkets to peddle, shouts from shopkeepers advertising their wares, children running around, giggling and chasing invisible monsters. His father told him of a much different Lusk from when he was a boy, when perhaps 30 years ago everyone knew each other. That was not the case anymore, as he said he recognized maybe 5 people out of 100. That was before the wall was built, too. A little more than waist high and made of mortar and unpolished stone, a wall encircled Lusk and delineated the town from the countryside and villages around it. There were a good deal of friends. Sorry, they weren't friends. There were a good deal of fields and pastures between the wall and the town proper, but the fields outside the wall were largely ignored by the people living inside. In truth, the wall was used less for defense and more for the sense of belonging it provided. But it was still a wall, and it made Thornton feel like he was an outsider whenever he passed through it. Walls give people a sense of stability, Olson used to say, because they keep the outside out and the inside in. Looking at the town that still lay a fair distance away, Thornton could see that his father was right. He was an outsider looking in. He glanced back at Mira, who was following about 20 feet behind him and had dismounted a ways back to walk alongside Matilda. She was talking to the old brown mare and stroking her mane, giving her a short break from pulling her weight on the cart. He hopped off his own cart and grabbed Jericho's reins to wait up for her. While he did so, he pulled out the makeshift map to study it again. I'm not sure where this is, so I might have to do some looking around. It looks like it's back outside the wall, he said, squinting at the map as she approached. I guess I'll let you go on by yourself. Will you be in the usual place? Mira nodded and looked up from the sinking sun, and looked up at the sinking sun. I've got some daylight left, so I'll set up when I get in. I'll sell what I can today and leave the rest for tomorrow. Then you'd better get going, Thornton said with a smile. Mira flashed him a smirk and a thank you, then led Matilda further in toward the town. Thornton's eyes followed the road and watched as the dirt and mud paths from the outlying villages turned into streets of worn, cobbled stone. So I wanted to delineate kind of the idea of High Glade, which is, a village, from Lusk, which is a little bit of a town. Basically, throughout the story, I've got these different kind of tiers of, village, town, and city. The three being pretty much different in size, scale. Like a city would have guards, a wall, etc. This is kind of like a Middle Ages setting. So if you picture sort of the technology and basically things that were available at the time, that's sort of what I'm going for. So, Lusk is obviously going to be bigger than High Glade, with the walls surrounding it and everything like that. I picture maybe about 1,000 or so people living in the town. So that's kind of the idea of what you should picture when we're talking about Lusk. Looking at the town, Thornton was surprised at how big it seemed now. Maybe it was the fact that his father wasn't there with him, but he felt like he was seeing it for the first time. He shook his head and turned, setting himself back on the path to the wall. Outside the town was mostly just trees and grass, with the Talvin forest to the west and the numerous ambling roads around it that led to other villages in its vicinity. So the Talvin forest was actually another, I guess, character that I named after my brother. His middle name is Alvin, which is a family name. It was also my great-grandfather's first name, coal miner from West Virginia. So I kind of tried to make up for the fact that I named a horse after my brother, so I threw in another name for him. So after a bit of walking with nothing but the chirping of birds to keep him company, Thornton glanced at the crumpled map. It should be around here, he thought. He wondered if he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. He was no tracker, that much was certain. Looking to his right, though, in a clearing past some trees, he spotted a building. Glancing around and seeing no signs of life, he walked toward it and tied Jericho to a tree while he looked around. It was a large stone structure with double doors on the front, big enough to let 2 horses through, and looked like it had seen some very recent use. Thornton couldn't tell how far back the building went, as the trees behind it swallowed it up, but it looked big enough to at least be an inn or a warehouse. Odd place for an inn, he thought to himself. On one of the doors was a knocker made of iron, right in the middle, poised over a metal faceplate. After another glance around to satisfy his curiosity, and still seeing no one, Thornton reached out and gave it a quick trio of knocks. Jericho snorted uneasily from behind him and stumped his hoof. A quiet moment passed before Thornton knocked again. He was contemplating leaving when he heard faint footsteps approaching. The clank of a metal bolt being released was followed by the heavy sound of wood sliding and dropping onto the floor. One of the doors creaked open. Inside stood a man garbed in long black robes, whose face was obscured by the shadow of a hood pulled over his head. His sleeves hung down to his fingertips, and he made no eye contact with Thornton. "Bring them inside." His voice was low and raspy, like its essence had been burnt away by fire. Thornton nodded warily and walked over to the cart, where he began unloading the chains 2 by 2. He carried them inside the entryway, where he saw the man standing and pointing a long, sleeved hand toward the center of the room. Surrounding him were high, vaulted ceilings, with windows lining the tops of the wall. "Place them there," the man said, pointing to a spot in the middle of the floor. Thornton put the chains down in a pile and returned to the cart to repeat the process for the rest, making sure to keep a watchful eye on the hooded stranger. Back outside, Thornton could see that Jericho was equally distraught, shaking his head and stomping a hoof. "It's okay, boy," Thornton said softly, placing his hand on Jericho's muzzle to reassure the big brown stallion. "Nothing to worry about. Just wait till I'm done, then we can go home. Maybe even get you some carrots." Jericho's eyes widened at the mention of the word, and he nudged Thornton's shoulder in approval. Laughing, Thornton made his way to the cart again to load up some more chains. He brought them in, one thick length draped across each shoulder, and placed them in the same spot as the others, needing no instruction from the man in the hood. Silently, he returned for the others, intending to repeat the process without incident. After loading up the last of the chains, he walked in again to see that he was alone in the room. He furrowed his brow in confusion and walked to the center of the room where the other chains had been piled. He dropped them with a loud clank and looked around for his cowled customer. From the back of the building, behind a locked door, came a low rumbling that sounded like a growl. Thinking he could not get out of there fast enough, Thornton made his way back out to the cart to await his payment. When he stepped outside, though, he was surprised to see the man from inside had beaten him there and was looking at something inside the cart. He seemed startled by Thornton's footsteps, turning around to face the young man from Highglade like he'd been caught stealing. "Ah, you've finished," the man said, stretching his arms out innocuously. His sleeves fell back to reveal hands that looked charred and blistered. His hood hung conspicuously low over his face, which Thornton imagined was similarly scarred, so that only his mouth was visible. No wonder he keeps himself concealed, he thought to himself. "That's the last of the chains," Thornton said, eyeing him suspiciously. "Good," came the reply below the hood. The stranger turned to the cart and seemed to be looking at the hammer. "Such craftsmanship is rare outside Galdorok," he said. "Your father is more talented than I thought." "That?" Thornton said, looking at his hammer. My father didn't make that. The man seemed surprised at this. Oh? He asked. Who did? I might have some work for him. Thornton looked at him warily, but did not answer right away. I don't really know. It's just some old heirloom given to my father by his, and his father before him. It's nothing special. The man was now ignoring Thornton almost entirely, fixated instead on the hammer. I've never seen one like it, he said. His hands began to move to the white ash handle, but as he did, Jericho reared up and caused the stranger to back away. Thornton was at his horse's side in an instant, putting a calming hand to his face and staring death at the man in the robe. Easy, boy, Thornton said gently, his eyes still locked on the stranger. He won't hurt you. Seeming to come out of a trance, the man turned to Thornton. I suppose you would like your payment. He patted around his robe absent-mindedly and finally produced a small bag of coins. He handed it to Thornton and turned to leave without another word. Thornton thanked the man and watched as he retreated back inside the building. Turning to Jericho and giving him a quizzical look, he tossed the coin purse into the cart, climbed up, and began the trek back toward Lusk to find Mira. So that is the second chapter of Gift of the Shaper, and we meet a new character who has yet to be named, but we did revisit Thornton, who's dropping off the chains, and now he's completed that task, and he's going to go on to find Mira in Lusk. So I hope you enjoyed this second installation of Dave Reed's Gift of the Shaper. Like I said, it's a new series, but if you have any feedback, any comments, any questions about the story so far, feel free to leave them in the comments section. If you don't have the book, which I recommend you pick up if you're watching the video, so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on, you can pick it up on Amazon. Either search Gift of the Shaper or D.L. Jennings, and either one of those will take you right to it on Amazon. So thanks for stopping by. You can check me out on Facebook, D.L. Jennings. If you like, you got Instagram. I'm just DL dot. DL dot. I can't remember my Instagram name. It's in the comments. It's in the info section below. So thanks for stopping by, and hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.